Hello again, everybody, and welcome to EmPower Hour. My name is Corey Rosas, and I use he, him pronouns, and I serve as the program coordinator for UCLA Alumni Diversity Programs and Initiatives. I'm a Latino man with glasses, and today I'm wearing a gold jacket and a UCLA t-shirt. My background is UCLA blue with the EmPower Hour and Diversity Programs logos. Thank you for joining us for our virtual event, and we strive to make all of our events inclusive and expect all participants to abide by UCLA's principles of community, which I will link in the chat. And so to kick off this event, I'd like to first begin with a land acknowledgement. UCLA acknowledges the Gabrielino Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tovangar, the Los Angeles Basin, and Southern Channel Islands. As a land-grant institution, we pay our respects to Hunukvitam, the ancestors, Ahihirom, the elders, and Iohenkem, our relatives and relations, past, present, and emerging. So now I'm proud to introduce George Chacon, who is a board member of the UCLA Filipino Alumni Association and the current Immigrant Justice Project Manager at the UCLA Labor Center, who will be presenting today. Take it away, George.
Thank you, Corey. Hi, everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces, actually. It's really humbling to see some good friends and have some company as I talk about this topic, which the good folks at DPI have wanted me to present on. So firstly, just want to say my name is George Chacon, graduate of UCLA from 2010. Graduated with an International Development Studies major and an Education Studies minor. I am a Latino male wearing glasses with a very weird background. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the back, but I'm really happy to be here with you all. So I'm gonna share my screen so then we can get this party started. Everyone has their wine, right? Correct? Yes, well, I'm gonna take one sip and I'm going to share my screen. Awesome, great. So thanks again to the UCLA Alumni Association, specifically Diversity Programs and Initiatives, for giving me this opportunity. Today, I'm gonna talk about understanding your activist positionality. So let me give a 411 on why I was approached to do this. I'm a Latino male who has and is still currently on various Filipino identified spaces, including the UCLA Filipino Alumni Association. And I've been in many different spaces where I don't necessarily identify with, right? Including my current job at the Labor Center, where I work with a lot of folks who are immigrant, undocumented, or don't have quote unquote proper status to work here in the United States. And, you know, along with the idea of what the series of EmPower Hour is about, is to really like understand different perspectives and understanding and really like how to become an activist, especially in a world where things are getting a little too hectic. There's a lot of new things being developed in terms of terminology, and to really stake claim and to one's identity and the work that coincides with that, right? So I'm here to tell you that you can do the good work irregardless of your identity, right? But there's some catches to it. Not catches, but you know, there's things that you need to be aware of and consider when you're in different spaces that you don't necessarily identify with. And we're gonna go over it and we're gonna have a conversation about it. I'm very nonchalant, very informal. So we're just gonna go through like a 10-minute presentation, and then we're gonna have an activity. It's gonna be fun. And I'm gonna be drinking wine. So, you know, you're gonna ask questions, I'm gonna answer them, and it's gonna be fun, right? Right? Cool. So first of all, my UCLA Rap Sheet, right? I think, you know, as many of you all here, I'm very sure we're very aware. We're very involved when y'all were students at UCLA. I'm not gonna go over it, but let's just say I've been working at the university for over 6 years, and it shows. I'm kidding, but this drawing I made of myself was like right around January of this year, after almost a year of quarantine. And I really felt like that, but yeah, other than that, other spaces I was involved in when I was a student was, being part of Samahan Filipino, was very involved with their outreach project in the community programs office called SPACE, or Samahan Filipino Advancing Community Empowerment. I know there's a couple of y'all there. I was also a student of those services when I was in high school, back in Marshall High School, go Barristers, and very, very fortunate to have those experience and those mentors when I was very young, to really get into college and to also start thinking about things like identity. Outside of that, I was involved with METCHA when I was an undergrad, as well. I was the Cultural Affairs Commissioner, which is CAC under USAC. So I was student government, and that was a fun year. I can talk a little bit more about that anyway. So that's my rap sheet. So I'm very involved with the student activism scene at UCLA. I'm still kind of like get news. I'm actually currently the UCLA alumni representative on USAC. So I'm getting a lot of news now from the students currently. And let me tell you, regardless of whether it's virtual or not, things still go down, right? And students are still fighting the good fight to ensure that the university is for them and from them. So just want to uplift student activism currently happening right now, and not just the one that we've done back in the day. Just wanted to uplift some community bold space guidelines. I took this actually from Dr. Aisha Khan, who did one of the other EmPower hours last year around abolition, and it was really great. I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed her bold space guidelines here because when we talk about topics like racism, it's not enough to have a safe space, but we need to be bold about it and be honest with one another. And so just wanted to share this with you all, because I hope that we can talk a little bit more about our identities and how it relates to the work that we want to do in activism, right? So I'll take 15 more seconds for y'all to read, because I'm not going to read over them. I'll take this 10 seconds to drink a little bit more wine. Cool. So quickly, I just want to talk about a little bit about positionality. To be truthful, I actually never encountered the word when I was confronted to do this series, right? And I'm like, positionality, I think I know what that means, right? Let's just say I've been out of academia for a long time now, right? So I'm like, so I'm researching, I'm looking it up, and I was like really very happy to see that we're really thinking very in depth about what it means to be and to hold different identities, but still doing the good work, especially addressing really big things like anti-Black racism and anti-Blackness, and to consider how one's own identities that may hold privilege and power in our society, and how that can really put blind spots on the work that we do in general, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about this in the next couple of slides. Just wanted to share like a quick quote from Marissa Elena Duarte, who talks a little bit about positionality around tech and the internet. You should definitely look up her work. But this definition is pretty bare bones, right? A methodology that requires researchers to identify their own degrees of privilege through factors of race, class, educational attainment, income, ability, gender, and citizenship, among others, for the purpose of analyzing and acting from one's social position in an unjust world. So really coming to an understanding of the power and privilege you hold with your own identities, acknowledging that certain identities come with privilege and others don't. And also really acknowledging the word of intersectionality, that we have to understand that we don't come in with just one particular identity, we come with multiple identities. And sometimes those identities can stack on one another and really provide you with a lot of power or be oppressed a lot, right? And we all have to understand that as we get into the work of really addressing an unjust world. But don't take my word for it, right? There's definitely better academics and experts who can really like break this down for you. So I'm gonna click on this link and it should play an excerpt from a 5-minute like SoundCloud thing.
In a previous place of work, I was facilitating a conversation between a white man and a white woman. And positionality is important when you're thinking about their experiences of walking that particular campus. The white woman said of a particular parking lot that she didn't feel safe walking in that particular parking lot at night. His response was, I don't see what's wrong with that parking lot. I walk in that parking lot at night all the time. To understand why they experience that parking lot differently, one needs to understand positionality. She sees that parking lot as a woman. He sees that parking lot as a man. It is their social positions that give them insight into what is the reality of that space. That's why positionality is important. It gives us insight into what other people experience that we may not.
A low-income gay white man.
So I'm gonna quickly just summarize, but positionality provides us the ability to understand what people go through based on their different identities, right? As the story went, like if you're not even like a straight white male, but if you're like a straight male walking alone, you don't necessarily think about your blind spots. You don't necessarily think about, you know, your safety as if you were a female walking alone. And you know, major shout outs to my wife who's here, Frances, who always reminds me about that stuff, right? Especially when I go, when I was marathon training, half marathon, not a full marathon. And I would run like late at night at 9, she would be, you know, concerned. And I would be like, why are you concerned? It's okay. And then she would be, yeah, I don't think that way because I have to be concerned. And of course that's basically as a slap, right? Like to remind me that I'm a male, and that comes with privileges and whatnot. So positionality, as with what I've been talking about, is a way to give us an understanding on what someone else goes through based on their social identities that are different from ours. So I wanted to kind of share my own social identities in conjunction with this cool comic background slide deck that I found. But you know, just wanted to share with you all, right? I'm a first generation person, so that means my parents immigrated here to the United States. I'm a light-skinned Latino male. I'm youngish, right? I'm 33, but you know, people can still confuse me for a 25-year-old, I hope. I'm a cisgender man. I'm a heterosexual, middle class as my socioeconomic background. I'm a Christian and I practice Catholicism. And I am a citizen of the United States. I put it in quotations because, you know, screw borders, whatever, right? You know, whatever, right? Right, guys, right? Screw borders. But, you know, that's still what we live in, the system we're in, right? So these are my identities. And, you know, thank goodness for space and for the leadership of Samahang Filipino back in 2000 and wow, I'm talking about 2004, who really introduced this concept of identities to me when I was a dumb sophomore in high school, right? Because then, throughout the last, my God, Jesus, like more than 15 years, I start to think about these things, especially in the spaces that I'm in, right? So let's talk about a little bit about how I go through thinking through my positionality in Pilipinx identified spaces or other spaces. It could be other spaces too. Say if I'm with a group of, folks who are undocumented or documented, their experiences are going to be very different than mine. But yeah, so it's hard to like break down what I go through because, when I think these things, I think things through, I don't write them down, right? I just think through them, right? And act it out. So this is really difficult to write it down. But as you can see, I have to be aware of the invisibility of Asian identified peoples. And going even further down the rabbit hole, I have to also think about the invisibility of certain Asian communities within the bigger Asian community, right? So when we think about Asian or Asian American, we think of, China, Japan, right? But solely like it's very rarely we as a society think about the different, communities and ethnicities under the Asian umbrella, right? And, working and building community with Filipinos in the last 15 years. Wow. You start to realize that their experiences are completely different from the experiences of other Asian communities, right? And, so I always have to remind myself that, one, there's like a double layer of invisibility when it comes to working with Filipinos and Filipino Americans. I always try to uplift opinions and the work of women and LGBTQ identified folks in these spaces because a majority of society in Filipino and Filipino American families are very patriarchal, right? And so I always tend to ensure that I always raise the voices up of women and other LGBTQ folks. Partly because a lot of my politics was taught by very strong Filipino women too. So I get that a lot. I always try to gravitate to shared cultural values and interests. So it helps to be Latino because the quote unquote Latin experience or global experience is very similar to the Filipino experience or the Philippines. Both countries were pretty much pillaged and colonized by Spain, and then later on the United States through economic and military means. So there's a lot of similarities, right? And so I definitely try to I hate using the word leverage because it means like I'm manipulating someone, but it's more like really understanding and connecting with people on shared things, food, community, dismantling oppression, right? Because you're in spaces that tries to do social justice, so there's already there a shared value, right? That you can definitely work together on. But you also have to be aware of diverging cultural values. In the last couple of years, really, it's about understanding that sometimes folks in the Filipino spaces I'm in don't necessarily, it's hard to say this, but they don't necessarily value or practice directiveness or being direct, right? I do. I don't know if that's because of my dad and my mom growing up with them and them just like, telling how they really feel in front of each other all the time. But I really do value that. But sometimes that kind of comes run afoul with folks that I work with, especially in Filipino identified spaces, who tend to think more about keeping relationships and think more of it as kind of nudging folks along to a particular decision instead of like necessarily being quote unquote combative. I'm not saying I'm combative, but it could come up that way when I really do speak my mind. And that is also not necessarily just a Filipino value, but it also shows in different generations too, right? So I have to be very aware of that stuff. Not to say that I have to ignore it or not even address it, but being aware of it is really important, so that you can keep doing the good work and not just get boggled down by disagreements or, I guess, misunderstandings. And sometimes you do get some flack for having certain positions when it comes to social justice, and that's something I work on all the time, and being very aware that, like, it's not going to be easy, and it's never going to be easy, right? So trying to address that while still keeping the relationship intact. But that's just my thinking process, right? But what's more important is like, how do you show up? And by the way, I do this like just today, just for you all, right? Because I'm wearing the same thing. So how I show up for the different communities I work with, that communities I don't necessarily identify with, is like I assert their priorities and needs. For example, when we're talking about scholarships, a couple of years ago, I think a couple of folks were mad or angry that Filipino Alumni Association and other networks, diversity networks, wanted to read their own applicants, because we understand the needs and experiences of those identified applicants. Yeah, just know them, not even better. We just know those experiences, right? Compared to like what, other groups may not know. And I remember someone pushed back asking, you mean to say that I, as a white woman, cannot read those applications? And I thought about it for a second, and I was like, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I just let it at that, right? So being very stern about what the needs are of the community, and to really uplift them. Although I should have been a bit better at wording that, but I was just not, I just didn't want to like go back and forth. So I just wanted to like move ahead and be assertive of like my positions and the position of PAA in general. So another thing I show up is to uplift other communities, right? So I remember last year, in both the Filipino Alumni Association and also in my workspace at the Dream Resource Center at UCLA Labor Center, I really felt it was really pertinent for us to really address and really uplift the work around addressing anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism, especially after George Floyd's murder last year. So I wanted to uplift those concerns and how can we address this within our different communities and spaces that we're in, because I understood in my positionality that, like, there is anti-Blackness within the Latino community, of course, and of course there's going to be anti-Blackness in other communities. So being assertive and really being clear about those goals and addressing them through programming, as well as through our social media posts, and for work, it was to provide an anti-Blackness training for our many fellows at the time. So training like almost 60 young immigrant leaders on anti-Blackness within the immigrant rights movement. challenge, I think I already provided that example. Shut up and listen. Sometimes you just have to shut up and just listen to what people are telling you, especially if you said something that didn't jive well and really showed your privilege. A clear example of this is when I was talking to my colleagues at work about voting, and of course they can't vote because they're not citizens of the United States. And so they just looked at me and they were like, "We can't vote." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then they just talked to me for like a good 5 minutes about how, maybe that wasn't the best thing to say. And of course, understanding my privileges at the moment, I definitely didn't say anything back, and just listened and of course apologized. But more importantly was to just listen and to really begin the work to how can I be a better person when it came to my colleagues, especially when it comes to around elections, which could be a really big thing. Step back, very similar, I guess, just step back and just like really see the terrain and what's going on, and be you. I think a lot of these things won't be possible if you're just silent and if you just like pretend you're a different person, right? Because if you pretend to be this like ideological social justice warrior, then you won't get called on your shit. And I think that's really important. You have to be yourself, so that one, I think that you're genuine, right? So you're not faking it. But more importantly, people can call you out on your shit so you can actually grow as a person. So I'm not saying I say jokes left and right or just say whatever comes to my mind. I am saying that I am myself and I'm okay with that. And if people were harmed by my actions, then we can talk about it and address those harms, right? Because like I think in these spaces, I don't think we ever have the intention to hurt people. But as some of us may know, intention is bullshit at times, and we have to think about the impact, right? And the impact is what really has lasting effects. And just want to leave you all with a quote that I got from the amazing Dr. Ayesha Khan from that other EmPower Hour. The moment we accept that we deserve to be treated as human beings, we treat others like it, and we start to care for those with lesser. I saw that quote, and it was among various quotes too, but this one really spoke to me because it kind of like reminded me of what really kind of got me into social justice work in general when I was a kid. Surprisingly, from like a very children-based Christian book about Jesus, treat unto others how you would treat, how you want to be treated. I think that's the quote. I'm always forgetting. Frances is gonna correct me after she comes back from work. But it's the idea that I want to be treated with respect, and so how do I provide that same respect to other people, especially folks who are treated like crap in our society, right? And once you think that, and you start to understand just the unfairness of it all, right? And how you can, and just start thinking about what you can do to make society a little bit better, right? Because we're all individuals, but there are ways to make things work. And that to me is what's the most important lesson of it all, right? Whether we're talking about intersectionality, positionality, identities, etc., right? This is, to me, really the calling card. And that's it. I hope I didn't take that long. But yeah, and I just want to say thanks to, again, UCLA alumni for providing me this opportunity, and also like whatever slides go for this amazing template. Love the comic and stuff too. So I just wanted to throw that out there too. But yeah, I just want to take a couple of minutes for questions before we go into some activities in breakout rooms, if y'all don't mind.
I just want to thank you so much for this presentation and for sharing your story with us. I really appreciated, like one of the key things that I got from what you shared is just being authentic. And I love how you talked about authenticity allows us to grow because it allows someone to like provide us feedback in an honest, helpful way too. So thank you for reminding me of that. And again, for this just really great, for sharing your story with us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Monica.
George, thank you again for just being open and sharing who you are. I love the graphics, by the way, adorable. Like I love it. But I wanted to ask you, and you know, maybe this could be for the group too, is where's a moment where you feel like you maybe misstepped because you're in positionality, and how would you like recover? You know, I think that's always an important one too. I think it's always, sometimes when we talk about positionality, everyone's like, oh, now that I know this, I can't mess up, but we inevitably do because we're real human beings. So would you be open to sharing a time how you messed up and how you maybe addressed it?
Yeah, I mean, there was that one example of like me just touting my I voted sticker in front of my colleagues who can't vote. So that was definitely like a I fucked up moment right there when I realized. I'm trying to think right now, specifically when it comes to the spaces of, you know, PAA. It's hard because I think I think there's a lot of stuff going on when it comes to work with like Filipino spaces, because there's so many similarities, and there's not necessarily a lot of like power, right? As a Latino male, what it comes down to more, it was like the other identities, you know, sex, gender, you know, sexual identity. So it's, for me, it's more about like understanding values and how sometimes like my directiveness can come off as being douchey or I guess like know-it-all, and just like not respecting other people's processes, right? So definitely understand when there could be harm, and so I do my best. Like for me, like when I feel like I did something shitty, you know, after the fact, and there's like no one telling me if I did it or not, I'm just like, you know what? I'm not gonna like sit on this emotion of like being a shit person. I'm just gonna like really like talk to someone and say, hey, by the way, I've said this and I may have overstepped. Can you just let me know if I did, because I want to apologize and talk it through, right? And just being direct. So I had to do that a lot recently, I guess, especially when it comes to like virtual work and pandemic. You don't see the legit necessary body language that you might need in order to really like make decisions on what you do or how you say it, what you say, right? It's really just like our voices, to be quite honest. And so, yeah, that's you know, talking to a colleague on the side, texting that colleague, not getting a response for a week or two, and still be like, nah, I'm not gonna ignore this. I'm gonna reply one more time and say, hey, by the way, I texted you. I just wanted to see if you still want to talk about, you know, what happened like 2-3 weeks ago. And you know, being open to have those conversations, no matter when they happen. Of course, all within reason, right? All within reason. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard to like, you know, sometimes you feel like you're just like stuck up your own butt, and sometimes you have to like take your head out of there and just really start thinking about like just doing things like texting, like calling someone, etc.
Yeah, I know it's hard, like especially with like this kind of receding culture and cancel culture that's around. I think that stuff can become really real and sometimes toxic, but definitely creates moments of learning, I suppose.
Oh, totally. Totally. One more question, or one more thought or comment before we go on to like a actual talking to each other as people.
I just wanted to say one thing, and thank you, George, for this is Seda.
Hi.
It was really great to hear your perspective, especially in the different spaces that you're in, you know. And I think I think it even starts in family. For me, you know, having mixed status family, definitely I could see how you yourself have to always, I myself certainly had to be mindful of different things, you know, of owning that privilege, and especially right now with COVID, right? The family of my family that did get COVID was because of that unfortunate way of, you know, their life, their how they make their money is by being out, you know. I have the privilege to be able to be home and be protected and be sheltered and be able to not be exposed. So it's definitely something that it starts at home, and then also even within our communities, and understanding that that disparity, I guess. But I really appreciate you being in the bigger world and bringing fresh perspectives when those voices are not there, and being open-minded to also learning and sharing with us here your lessons learned and also the process. So thank you for that. I just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much for sharing. It's really helpful to understand that it happens everywhere in different levels, right? And I'll talk about family. My God, my dad and my sister were visiting this past month, and it was like, oh my goodness, there was a lot of checking myself before I said anything. So I'm happy to that you share that with us. So with that in mind, I really want y'all to talk to one another, if that's okay with you all, and go through a similar process, but more just to open up and just talk and connect, right? Because this could possibly be my last virtual Zoom for a while, since, you know, things are starting to open up really weirdly and fast, right? I don't know, am I the only one who's feeling very like claustrophobic of that? No, it's just me. Yeah, it's
No, you're not wrong.
okay, for sure. I know, it's so weird. Anyway, so I'm gonna share my screen one more time so we can do this activity. I just wanted to thank Patricia, actually, because she's the one who you know, introduced this identity wheel to me when I was a project director for Space a couple of years ago. And it's such a good way of like really thinking things through. But let's take a couple of minutes to really kind of fill out like our social identities, right? As you can see, there's like all these particular identities that we can help identify with. There are some that we probably don't even think about, especially physical, emotional development, ability, and disability, right? That's something I didn't even put on my own slide too. So talk about privilege there, right? So let's take a little bit to kind of fill out our identities, so then we can have a breakout session to talk about these questions that I have, right? While also sharing your identities, right? So the questions are, what privileges do you have based on your social identities? How does that show in the world? And what biases do you think you have? Ooh, the wine. How can you use your positionality to get insight into what other people experience? And lastly, how will you show up for others? Simple question, right? In the future, how will you show up for others who, you know, you don't necessarily directly identify with, or who may be in a lesser standing in our society? So yeah, if we don't mind, let's take a couple of minutes to fill out our identity wheel, and then we'll go on to breakout sessions. If anyone wants to share what are some of the highlights.
I'll go ahead and share. I think one of the great things about our discussion is that we really built on our experiences, which I felt really represented. I mean, as George, you mentioned, sort of like the intersectionality, where we have similar experiences as being female, but, you know, we come from different areas with regards to our like cognizance of ableism and just we're in different parts of our lives. But it was just such a great space, it just felt really good to hold the space for each other. That's what I'll say. So thank you again to those that were in my group.
I think we talked a little bit about like our positionality in our positions of like our jobs and how we try to address like clear inequities that we see. Mark shared about, you know, his work in supporting folks' finances, and how, like, you know, folks are just not aware of like what to do at times. We also talked about, like, you know, the privileges that the males have and how we need to do a lot more to provide space and to also like ensure that, you know, women are valued, especially in the workspaces, right? Because it was just, you know, like sometimes, like the example I shared too was like sometimes like people don't even recognize that an idea was from a female colleague. And so a practice that I hope that we all can employ as males is to correct right away, saying, oh, by the way, no, that was so and so's idea, you know, not mine. Or state that like, oh, please, you know, she you know, she was talking, can we like please hear her out, stuff like that. So, which it's something I only know because people told me that was an issue, right? And I kind of like was operating like, oh, it's not an issue at all. So yeah. Okay, last group.
Manny, you should share. I like the intergenerational conversation that was happening.
Yeah, I guess you know, I'm older and I have kids who and they just graduated college, so I want them to understand their ethnic identity because I'm Filipino and their mom is Mexican, but we're really first generation. So we have this very blended identity living in Virginia. So, I mean, just think of all that, right? I mean, that's a blender of odd things, okay? Um, but the main thing that I wanted is that I wanted us to all think of, you know, we are privileged, we are blessed to have what we have, so we have to do things to better others. And my focus is on helping high school students, underrepresented high school students, do what they want to do after high school, which mostly is college. And then my kids seem to be more focused on environmental things, but at least they're doing something. So that's really important.
Thanks for sharing, Manny. I really appreciate it. Yeah, thanks everyone. I think these conversations are really important. I was gonna say hella important. I don't know why I stopped myself. But it is really important to have these conversations, especially with like our networks or friends, of strangers. It seems not really strangers. We're all Bruins in one way, shape, or form. But like really, like continuing on that conversation is really important. For me, I think it's just important to like different diversity groups within the Alumni Association to like engage with one another, to really discuss this and really see what are the needs from the different communities and what can we all do as organizations, as individuals to uplift, and to address, you know, these unjust inequities. Redundant, I know, unjust inequities is the same thing, but like, you know what I mean, right? Like, but with that, I think we're done. I just want to just say thank you to Corey for helping me out, and to the UCLA Alumni Diversity programs and projects and initiatives. I also want to say a huge thank you to all my friends and colleagues from Samahang Filipino to UCLA PAA, because it was because of just the Filipino community in general. I think I've been so open since I was a kid, really, to include me, this weird Latino kid who was pretty loudmouth and just annoying, really, and like, you know, embraced me with open arms through like friends and their families and stuff like that. So it really has helped me really understand like the complexities of the world, and open doors for me to really address social injustice in the ways that I can. So just want to leave that out there, and to like really like utilize your power that you have, and to really like uplift and support those who may not have that much power to begin with. I just want to end with that. So thank you.
Thank you, George. And before we leave, I am launching a quick poll.
Oh, there's a poll.
Like to take this poll to help us plan some future Empower Hours and get some of your feedback, we'd really appreciate it. There's also some links in the chat to other diversity programs and initiatives programs, as well as more alumni events. So take a look at that. And with that, thank you so much, everybody.